let's get into the winners. And I think we got to start off with Kenyon Sadiq. And let me tell you what, Joel, I've got a little bit of mixed feelings on this Kenyon Sadiq thing, because number one, literally the first thing that I see as soon as I land on my return flight, I open up the Twitter, because what else are you gonna do when you land? First text the wife, say, hey, I landed, made it. Then it's, let's see what's going on Twitter. I see Kenyon Sadiq just ripping up the combine. And again, part of me is like, hey, I feel really good about the fact that Kenyon Sadiq was a guy that we talked about on the show, I think basically in every episode, including an episode that we pre-taped for Mock Draft Monday next week about, man, this guy's just going to rip up the combine. He's a freak athlete. So we got that right. The thing I regret is, though, Joel, almost all of the landing spots that we pointed out, like, hey, maybe he goes to the Niners late in the first round. Not happening. This guy tore it up to the point that I don't think he's going to be a late first round pick. 4.39 40 at 6'3", 241 pounds. 43 and a half vertical. The broad jump was crazy. I mean, again, we knew this guy was going to be a freak, Joel. He put it out on the field at the combine. He is indeed a freak show athlete.
Yeah, just to put it into perspective compared to past guys, fastest 40 ever by a tight end, 99.9th percentile vertical, broad jump. He's just small. And there's a couple other tight ends like this, but he is like that perfect athlete, just a little smaller as a tight end. But when we're talking about tight ends in the combine, out of any of the offensive positions, athleticism matters the most for tight ends compared to their production in college and lots of other things that we look at. It is a bigger indicator. So for him to go out in the combine and perform like he did, it does make sense now, like that he is going to be drafted probably in the early first round, not just the late first round at this point. And there's a couple other guys, like I said, at the tight end room that perform really well at the combine as well. But Sadiq is just on another level right now.
Man, it was so impressive. And you're right to point out that athleticism can be something that really translates to success at the tight end position, which isn't necessarily true. Again, we're going to talk about some guys at wide receiver and tight end that showed off, but that doesn't always wide receiver and running back that showed out at the combine. That doesn't always correlate to production at the NFL level. It's just kind of, we're checking boxes here. We're confirming, especially what we saw on film. But with tight ends, it definitely matters. It's funny, again, just to spoil the Kenyon Sadiq conversation that I have with EJ Snyder that's going to be coming out on Mock Draft Monday, less than a week from now, next week. I compared him like size, speed wise, sort of as EJ was kind of throwing him out there, to Vernon Davis, which I think is the other guy that ran that like crazy fast. Right now, Vernon Davis was over 250 pounds, and weight obviously does matter. But I still think, Joel, when I look at Sadiq, in addition to the fact that he is a freak athlete, and I know the production isn't crazy, but I think he's like pretty willing to scrap as a run blocker, which in our world today where we're saying, how can this guy stay on the field for all the snaps? I think he at least does kind of check that box for me. What are your thoughts on just what you've seen from him so far?
Yeah, I would agree. And even though I was saying that he is smaller, he is still strong, just when we're going just off of his bench press and his percentiles there. And I did see you compare him to Vernon Davis. And when you're comparing him, you said, everybody's going to do this now. And since that point, I've seen like 2 or 3 other people post something about how he's like Vernon Davis in terms of his comparables. But the production, like you said, like it's a little bit lower. He is very young. So when we're talking fantasy, I would say he's most likely like a better dynasty pick at this point than he is redraft, especially like you talked about the landing spot in year 1 compared to like last year. Tyler Warren, 75 yards per game, about that mark. Same with Brock Bowers the year before that. Sadiq in an Oregon offense, that was good, like passes a decent bit. Only 40 receiving yards per game. Like he wasn't necessarily the focal point of that offense, but he is early declare, 20 years old and this athletic. So it might not be one of these guys that is going to come in and dominate from the get-go in fantasy, but down the line, I like him better as more of the dynasty prospect.
Yeah, and just thoughts, because I haven't talked with you about the class overall, just the strength of it. What are your thoughts on this group of prospects, especially when we're looking towards dynasty rookie drafts? Because kind of the general feeling is that, I don't know, not great, not the strongest class at the top. Give me kind of your overall look on this class, especially as we're talking about, hey, can Kenyon Sadiq be a top 10 rookie dynasty pick, even if he's not the most productive tight end? Maybe he's not productive early. Just kind of give me your general sense of what the class looks like right now.
I was kind of on that wavelength early on in the season in terms like this isn't as good of a class as, say, 2027 when we're talking fantasy football, not just an NFL draft perspective. But Sadiq, like you said, I've seen him as high as the 106 in dynasty drafts right now. I think the top 5 picks are all pretty solid. You got like one running back in there, one quarterback. But I've seen Sadiq as the 106 in a couple mock drafts or people mapping it out behind those top 3 receivers, Jeremiyah Love and then Mendoza. So he can be up there. I wouldn't be shocked just depending on where he gets drafted. If he does get drafted in that early first round, I wouldn't be shocked at all if he's going to 106 because I feel like it is kind of a mess after that. There's going to be a lot figured out after those top few picks. And even those 3 receivers, I think a lot will be dependent on where they land just because they are so close right now. So after Love and Mendoza goes, it's going to be a little bit of a mess for a little bit. And then the back end of the first, at this point, who knows? There isn't a clear RB2. You can kind of put anybody in there that you like. And then the receivers, pretty solid compared to maybe what we expected a little bit ago, but still not this dominant receiver that we're going to have like next season.
No, yeah, I would agree with that view on the receiver class. And just when we're looking at Sadiq's draft range in the actual NFL draft, I mean, I think he could, in this class where there's not necessarily a ton of blue chip players, and I know the production is not great for him, but at the same time, Joel, like NFL offenses barely know how to figure out how to use tight ends. They're getting better about it now. College offenses definitely don't know how to utilize like the traditional tight end. It's a lot more of the spread stuff. And you can get your occasional freak shows like Kyle Pitts in college or Brock Bowers in college, but that's kind of I mean, even Colson Loveland wasn't necessarily the most productive tight end. I'm interested to see more of like the data prospecting guys who I really respect kind of their view on Kenyon Sadiq in that way. But just again, I think there's a chance he could get himself into the top 15 draft picks. So way outside of the range that we were talking about him last week, just after this workout. And again, with so many teams moving these heavy personnel packages, maybe not into the top 10, but if I just go like Rams at 13, I know they just took Terrence Ferguson last year. Could they be a spicy landing spot? Ravens at 14, they kind of need a bigger body receiver. Could he be sort of that tight end too that eventually takes it over from Mark Andrews? Bucks at 15. I know they seemingly have a ton of pass catchers, but they might lose Cade Otton in free agency this year. Jets at 16. That's depressing, but I certainly think it's possible. Again, I just think that the range for Sadiq has certainly gone up from where we talked about it last week. He is definitely one of the biggest winners, but you mentioned running backs at the top of this rookie draft. The guy is obviously Jeremiyah Love to talk about. As if he needed to be any more of a winner, he certainly put it on the field last week. 4.36 40-yard dash at his size. Very impressive, Joel. I think he has to go down as a winner from this past week as well.
Yeah, I would agree. Like you said, like that's all he did. It's all he necessarily needed to do. A lot of these guys nowadays aren't doing too much tests. So he kind of knew he's going to run sub 4.4. Might as well go do it and show it. I wouldn't be shocked. All week before the combine, it was kind of like Jeremiyah Love's going to get into that top 10. Now, most of where I've seen is he's not going to make it to, say, the Chiefs at pick 9. Like, he's going to be before that. I've seen lots of rumors about the Titans. So we'll see. But any guy being drafted that high, rookie fantasy, like I know people have been burned recently, like Ashton Genty, Bijan. Before those 2 guys, it was like 7 or 8 straight hits from those guys that were being drafted that early.
Yeah, 6 foot, 212 pounds for Jeremiyah Love, 4.3 at the 40-yard dash. And by the way, just because you brought it up, I do think, look, I love my time out in Indianapolis. I think the combine has its the combine's kind of cooked, bro. I mean, like it's just so low participation. I still can't believe that people are throwing out, well, it's the fastest class that we've ever seen, fastest at this position. Yeah, the fast guys are the only ones that are running. I mean, we're going to talk about some guys who ran a little bit slower later on, but for the most part, it's just like, yeah, out there, you can go rip a 4.4 or lower. Like, you're going to go run, and if you don't, then you're not. I mean, the 3-cone drill, RIP, Joel, the 3-cone drill, it's over. I mean, nobody's doing the 3-cone. I think one running back this year ran the 3-cone, which is so disappointing because that was like, work. That's like my favorite. And it didn't work. That was like my favorite drill to watch guys go through, because I think it does show you some level of change of direction. So I'm with you, dude, that I think he might have. I ran through kind of a fake scenario in our last mock draft Monday about, well, what if he slips outside the top 10? There might not be, now he might not even make it to 10, you know? So if we get a situation where Jeremiyah Love is a top 5 pick, because he's a winner in the draft, but he goes to a team like Tennessee or Arizona even potentially, do you have any worries that he could be Genty 2.0, you know, this great talent, but goes to a bad situation? So in a way becomes a loser for the fact that he was a winner.
Yeah, in the short term, yes. It'll depend on the offensive line. I think Tennessee is not the worst spot in the world. I think Las Vegas last year, it was worse than was even projected in the offseason. Early on in the offseason, it was like, this offensive line might not be too bad. And then it was the worst in the NFL in terms of run blocking. Part of that was because of injuries. But I think Tennessee wouldn't be horrible. Like we saw what Tony Pollard did at the end of the season when they started getting little things together. They changed the coaching staff, all that sort of thing. And even we've seen guys, like I know there is Ashton Genty and Bijan, but there is also a lot of guys that were in bad offenses that did excel. Even though they were drafted very early and not the greatest situations, they just got the volume and had the talent and it worked out, the receiving. I think there'll be a lot of different things that play into it.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And it's tough to know because, like you just said, the Raiders situation, we probably didn't forecast it to be as bad as it was, but it truly was horrendous. Once we got into the season, you could tell that it was a pretty untenable situation from a run game, offensive line perspective in particular. Okay, so those are two big names that were winners. Give me one of the maybe lesser names that you saw that might be a winner to you.
At the running back position, it would be Mike Washington. One of those guys was inside the top 10 of running back prospects and then just destroyed the combine. I've seen him all the way up to RB2 now, like I was talking earlier. The RB2 is just completely up in the air. He came into this as like a early day 3 pick, round 4, round 5, and then just had the best combine ever. Part of that is because he didn't fully test. There was a couple that, he didn't do, but the things that he did do was incredible. Top or 95th percentile or above in every single thing. He's got the size. That's the big thing. We're talking about Love, his 40 time at his weight. Washington, 4.33 at 223 pounds. Like he is so fast for his size, and his vertical, his broad jump was also amazing. So he definitely rose up a bunch.
No question. That 40 at over 220 pounds is incredible. The explosiveness, really cool to see him get emotional afterwards. Even if, again, like we're saying, the 40 doesn't necessarily correlate to fantasy success or production at this position. Still, what it correlates to is getting drafted higher. And like that was a life-changing moment for Washington. So that was really cool to see. I absolutely loved that. Boone had a great tweet about this. He said he was hesitant to put Mike Washington on his sleepers list for the Thursday show that we did last week. Not a sleeper because he's not a sleeper anymore, essentially. He's a household name, as Boone mentions, after that combine. I think he will continue to be. And that's the great part about this is that, this running back 2 spot completely wide open. And I think there's plenty of teams, Joel, that will look out there and see that size and that speed and think, hey, maybe he's not a feature back in year 1, but we can add an explosive element to our ground game. Even if Mike Washington himself said he was a 3-down back, maybe he's not that early, but with so many veteran running backs available in free agency, he could certainly be a complement to more of a steady grinder back that we get added here over the next couple of weeks.
For sure. He's got the size for it. He can be an all-around player. There is some things where his red flags are things that maybe don't show up in the fantasy world. So that's my worry is maybe some fantasy people will value him a little bit more than, say, the NFL draft, because his 2 big weaknesses was his pass blocking and his fumbles. He had 12 fumbles, about 2%. That's like every other game he had a fumble. And not only is that not good just from an NFL draft perspective, but specifically for rookies. If he goes out there and he misses a block, if he goes out there and he fumbles, it's really tough to kind of be put in a situation where he can be a valuable rookie running back if he's just not being on the field as consistently.
I mean, listen, we have seen many rookies fail because of their pass protection issues or benched because of fumbles, what have you. Specifically the pass protection, I mean, which is again ironic because he was supposed to be this great pass blocking back coming into the league, but you only need to look back to Travion Henderson last year and why that was frustrating for him to get on the field consistently, because the pass protection just was an issue all year long for Travion Henderson, and it held him back for large portions of his rookie year from a fantasy standpoint. So that is a really good note for you to bring here, as the Mike Washington hype train is definitely going to take off here. I'll throw out a receiver that I thought was a winner. And maybe this makes me a winner because I was super nervous about KC Concepcion's weight coming into the week. I was very concerned about what he would weigh in at. I was terrified he was going to be another one of these 185-pound, jitterbug receivers that separate really well, that I always fall for. Great measurables for him. 6 foot, 196 pounds. Didn't do any of the testing. So that's obviously, did he put on some weight to come in at 196 and then not run, and then he's going to be lighter at his pro day and run a fast 40? Totally possible, but sometimes you just need to see that check in. He checks that box. And also, Joel, I thought he had a really nice showing in the gauntlet drill. The biggest question with him is the drops. I'm curious if you have any other notes on KC as well, because I'm a big fan, but the drops were definitely an issue. I thought he caught the ball really well. He kind of claps at it sometimes on film, but for the most part, I think it's a focus-based issue, and that showed hey, he was focused on getting it right, at least that day in the gauntlet. He looked really good, consistently on the line. I'm pretty excited about what he showed us this past weekend.
Yeah, I know you've been high on him. He transferred to Texas A&M, produces well. I was wondering, because I know you're talking like he's comps, Jaden Reed, Stephon Diggs. After this week, does it kind of change in terms of your hope of he can be more than just more that gadget guy or slot only in a league that is getting away from that a little bit more? Or is it more so going to depend on just his landing spot?
Definitely going to be dependent on the landing spot, but I think him being 196, it's like I said, he's somewhere between Steph Diggs and Jaden Reed. I think if he was sub 190, you're probably looking at him being closer to that Jaden. And I think Jaden Reed, as we talked about with Connor Rogers, Jaden Reed's a really good player. Just from a fantasy standpoint, he's not on the field enough to be a consistent every week option, even when he is healthy, because he's that slot only guy, as you point out. And I think Jaden Reed can do more, but it doesn't matter what I think because the Green Bay Packers disagree with me. I think KC Concepcion being 6 foot 196, looking like he was carrying the weight well. In addition to that, that probably puts him a little closer to Steph Diggs, who's another guy that's about 6 foot 200 pounds. So I think they look pretty similar from a build perspective. Obviously, now we have to see where he lands and what the role might be with that next team.
Yeah, even like an example of Steph Diggs, like when he was with the Bills, he did play a lot of outside receiver, but Texans, Patriots kind of had him as more of just that slot receiver overall.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, give me another winner in your eyes from this past weekend.
I would say Jacoby Lane. I know we'll talk about a lot of these, a ton of X receivers, and there's some maybe that didn't have the fastest 40 times, but Lane was a guy 97th percentile in terms of his total combine, a 4.47 in terms of his 40 time at 6'4". So I feel like that is a little bit of a bump for him as an outside X receiver with the competition of so many other guys that are like him.
Yeah, Lane also really good showing in the gauntlet. I thought caught the ball really well, was consistently on that line. He's an interesting player, man, because I think he's a little bit stiff, but he does have the build-up speed from what I've seen so far. It tracks and tracks the ball well, I think, and is tough at the catch point. Just needs to certainly be refined as a route runner. But if we're talking about a guy who could go in the 3rd or 4th round, the size and his showing this weekend was was some nice work by Lane. Maybe a little bit of like a sacrificial X receiver, but at times, Joel, Alec Pierce has been a little bit of that sacrificial X receiver, but just kept building up playing time, kept getting a little bit better, and then by year 4, he has 1,000 yards on 47 catches. Lane is somebody to kind of monitor in that regard, as maybe he can just stick on the field in that way. I've got one more receiver to throw out before we get a few more in here. I have not watched Deion Burks at all, but I leave Combine week being like, I can't wait to see what this guy's film looks like. Maybe it's terrible, by the way. I don't know. I haven't charged him yet. But number one, runs the 4.3 at 5'10", 180 pounds. 42.5 vertical jump, 10 and 11 in the broad, really good, just explosiveness there. Puts up 26 reps on the bench at 180. Now, I don't know, Joel, if he, I don't know how much bench pressing you're doing these days. I love the bench. I'm very into this stuff. I don't know if his reps look like Jordan Tyson's reps, which the NFL put out there, and those were questionable. The reps were questionable. Nevertheless, still impressive to put up 26 on the bench no matter what. So it's questionable. But you know what? 26 reps of 225 is very impressive, even if you got to push it up with your chest a little bit, push up with your hips a little bit there. So I don't know what Burks' reps look like, but I'll tell you this. This guy's ripped, okay? Burks was just a true ball of muscle out there. So I can't wait to check out his film. I haven't seen any of it yet, so we'll at least be dialed in on Deion Burks coming out of the combine. So in that regard, he's a winner for me coming out of it.
Totally. Yeah. He's smaller than me, so that's not good. I also cannot bench 26 reps of 225. That's a little bit different. Also cannot run a 4.3. But it'll be interesting. There hasn't been much fantasy success in guys like this. They're used in the NFL a lot. Obviously, they're not one-to-one, but it would be interesting if he can find himself in a spot, maybe a developmental spot that can kind of eventually get him into some fantasy success too.
Yeah, I also cannot run the 40 in 4.3 seconds. Yeah, and I'm much bigger than 5'10", 180 pounds. But anyways, Joel, give me a couple more winners on your end before we throw to break here.
One quarterback, everyone's talking about him, but it's going to be Taylen Green. 9.99 on the RAS. That's the same range as like an Anthony Richardson, a Cam Newton. He's not the greatest prospect in the world, but it's not the greatest quarterback class. And if he is, for a fantasy sake, if he ever does get like a spot start or is developed into a guy that can play half a season or anything like that, he could be a guy that can be a starter in fantasy, an automatic start in super flex leagues just because of his rushing upside. The passing hasn't been as efficient, but just the rushing upside and being basically the greatest quarterback athlete ever. It gives him the hope. We see Anthony Richardson. Like, Richardson has not been good as an NFL starter, but when he starts, you play him in fantasy.
100%. Yeah, I watched a decent bit of Taylen Green because Arkansas had two receivers in the draft last year, Isaac Tesla and Andrew Armstrong, who didn't even make a final roster. So glad I spent the time on that one. And I thought his film was actually better than that, which is a shame. But anyways, so I saw a good bit of Taylen Green. I haven't watched him any of this year, but it was very up and down, certainly in 2024. But the athleticism was real then. You could see it. And he's just somebody that's very interesting from that 4.36 perspective. So definitely somebody to monitor there. Talk to me about Eli Stowers, the Vanderbilt tight end, 4.51 in the 40, one of the faster times for a tight end.
Yeah, his numbers look very, very similar to Sadiq that we talked about earlier. Just incredible in terms of the testing. A little smaller. He's a fifth-year guy, has been on 3 different teams, but can make his way into potentially the first round. At least will be a round 2 pick, I believe, if he's not taken in round 1. So he's not as high of a prospect as Sadiq, but his testing numbers are very similar. The best broad jump ever. Somehow not the best vertical ever for a tight end at 45.5 inches. Somebody hit 46 inches, but incredible athleticism on top of just very similar to Sadiq, but still 65 yards per game in his 5th year as a senior. So good production overall, too.
Yeah, probably a bit more of a true receiving tight end as opposed to somebody that's going to get in line at 236 pounds. I mean, that is essentially a big receiver. So from a fantasy standpoint, that's like you got to pay attention to. Is he going to be, well, obviously it depends on draft capital where he's going to go, but is he going to get kind of stuck in that Dalton Kincaid role where he's not a tight end, but he's essentially just a slow, big slot receiver. So you can kind of get caught in tweener mold there. But nevertheless, I mean, if that guy goes in the 3rd round or something like that, that becomes much more of like an interesting sleeper to watch during the process.
Yeah, totally. And he could slip back there. I feel like there is a lot of hype right now just because of the combine. And he's definitely like that clear, like top 2 tight end. There's not as much tight ends after those 2 that are really up there. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. He can be a guy like you were talking earlier, like Sadiq isn't going to slide to a Denver or a San Francisco. Maybe Stowers can.